IVs, or individual values, range from 0 to 31 and measure how naturally good a Pokemon is in a certain stat. You can have an adamant-natured Heracross and invest full attack EVs into it, but if its attack IV is less than 31, the max, it won't be as strong as another Heracross that has 31 attack. The default in competitive Pokemon, already done for you on Pokemon Showdown, is that IVs are maxed out. Even if you don't put any EVs in a stat, it can usually only help to have them as high as possible. Yeah, your Gen 4 Infernape isn't going to be much in the way of taking hits, but there's no reason why they shouldn't have their defenses maxed out. Even in cases where you know you're not going to be using the stat at all, say Skarmory's special attack, there's no reason to touch it. You don't even think about it really. However, counterintuitive though it may seem, in certain situations it is actually better to lower IVs for the sake of having those lower stats. It's one of those wonderful little unique facets of competitive Pokemon that give the game nuance and depth of strategy. Today we'll be exploring the most common cases of IVs being lowered and the advantages doing so brings. The most common instance of lowered IVs is Pokemon without any physical moves running 0 attack IVs. There is a good chance you have encountered this since it is the default on Pokemon Showdown. As soon as it sees your Pokemon has no physical attacks, it will automatically set its attack IVs to 0. Why? Well, if a Pokemon is confused and hits itself, the damage comes from its own attack stat. In a similar vein, in Gens 5 and later, where confusion is less common, foul play exists, a move that hits the opponent with its own attack stat. Thus, if you're not going to use physical attacks, there are pretty much only advantages to using 0 attack IVs. Taking less damage from confusion and or foul play is quite valuable. There are no such equivalents for special attacks, which is why fully physical Pokemon don't run 0 special attack IVs. Funnily enough, there is one significant exception to the rule of a Pokemon with no physical moves wanting to run 31 attack IVs. In Generation 3 OU, Skarmory's go-to set is Spikes, Protect, Toxic, and Roar. It's often tasked with taking on Gyarados, and Gyarados commonly runs Taunt, which will force Skarmory to struggle. However, since in the first 3 generations, Struggle Recoil is not the flat 25% of Gens 4 and beyond, Skarmory can actually beat Gyarados with Struggle if Sand is up, as it almost always will be, since even boosted Gyarados does almost no damage to Skarmory. On top of that, Taunt only lasts 1 turn in Generation 3, and Confusion is non-existent in competitive. Thus, even if you're using no attack Skarmory in Generation 3, make sure to manually add that 31 attack IV. Most other Pokemon without physical attacks are rarely ever forced to struggle, so they largely prefer the lower damage from Confusion and or foul play. Another note, Hidden Power's strength in generations besides 7 is dependent on IVs, and a 0 attack IV will bring it down to 68 base power from 70, or 58 from 60 in Generation 6. Thus, Pokemon running the likes of Hidden Power Fire, Grass, or Ice without a physical move in their arsenal will run an attack IV of 2, which will effectively perform the same function against Confusion and Foul Play while ensuring Hidden Power is as strong as possible. Even the Ultra Beast Kartana, with its insane 181 base attack, sometimes ran 19 IVs in attack and a timid nature in order to lower its attack low enough to get a speed boost from Beast Boost. This meant that Pokemon that naturally checked it like Tornadus Therian couldn't, and Kartana could still use Swords Dance to raise its attack. The other stat that is commonly lowered is speed, and the reasons are much more multifaceted. We'll start with the simple ones. If you're using a Pokemon with a Gyro Ball, like Ferrothorn or Generation 4 Bronzong, you want a speed lowering nature and a speed IV of 0. Gyro Ball's base power is dependent on how much slower you are than your opponents. So to make it as strong as possible, you want to ensure you are as slow as possible. Generation 4 Bronzong on its offensive Trick Room set takes this even further by running the speed lowering Macho Brace as its item, which lets it smack just about everything with a maxed out Gyro Ball, clocking in at a whopping 150 base power. Speaking of Trick Room, that is the other reason you would want to run a 0 speed IV. Under Trick Room, the slower Pokemon goes first, and thus Trick Room abusers want to be as slow as possible so they can quote-unquote outspeed as many other Pokemon while Trick Room is active. Now, unless you're using Gyro Ball, Pokemon that lower their speed IV don't necessarily have to go all the way down to 0. They often do, but there are several cases where the Pokemon in question will want to maintain a certain level of speed. For example, while most Trick Room users and abusers go all the way down to 0, in Gen 5 RU, offensive Trick Room Executor often does not. Depending on its team, it might even invest speed EVs. The idea is that against slow defensive Pokemon, cores, and teams, it's not going to beat them with Trick Room, so it wants to be able to outspeed them naturally to pose as much as an immediate threat as possible. While it's naturally slow to where it'll outspeed pretty much all offensive Pokemon, find the types of teams it'd want to trick room against. The nuance and basic tenet of this speed lowering is knowing the speed tiers of the metagame in question and manipulating a Pokemon speed IV to undercut certain targets while outrunning others. While the aforementioned Gen 5 RU Trick Room Executor illustrates this point decently, the most prominent important example comes in the form of the Switch Move Wars. Of course, fast switch moves are great. Fast U-turn or Volt Switch threatening Bug and Electric weak Pokemon respectively is a classic strategy. However, slow switch moves can be incredibly advantageous as well, as they allow the Pokemon switching in to come in for free. This is most apparent in Generation 8, with Teleport, Clefable, and the Slow Twins effortlessly, reliably, repeatedly feeding their teammates free entry. If you've got two such slow switch move using Pokemon facing off, then the slower one is advantage, as if both Pokemon use their switch moves, then the second one can send in something that faces off well against the Pokemon the opponent has switched in on the turn, letting it gain the upper hand. This has been a tactic ever since Baton Pass was the only switch move in Generation 3. Some variants of Baton Pass Celebi would drop their speed IVs to undercut opposing Celebi, though it wouldn't go too slow as it wanted to maintain its solid natural speed. Of course, others, like the Slow Twins or occasionally even U-turn Corviknight in Generation 8, would go to the absolute minimum speed possible, but since this was a standard, they would end up speed tying either way. You even had the incredibly rare instance of players running level 99 Slowking just so they can get that slower teleport. It was that big a deal. Then there were those that could do either lowered speed or absolute minimum speed. See the examples revolving around Gen 5 OU Rotom Wash, Utility Rock Jirachi, and Specially Defensive Heatran. Rotom Wash was a massive pain to switch into for the Drag Mag teams Rock's Jirachi found itself on, so Utility Jirachi found itself lowering its own speed to undercut Rotom Wash, letting it get that slow U-turn on it. Of course, Rotom Wash itself had a long history across multiple generations of lowering its speed for mirrors with itself. In Generation 5, it sometimes even went as low as hitting a stat of 189 speed to undercut Special Defensive Heatran, so its slow Volt Switch would protect its teammates from switching into Heatran's annoying lava plumes. But then Heatran caught on and started lowering its own speed IV to stifle this. Such speed lowering didn't always have to do with switch moves either. See the examples of Fortress in Generation 3 OU. In a 4-way mirror match, you wanted the slower Fortress so that you could spike after the opposing Fortress Rapid Spin, then go to your Gengar and block it. If your Fortress was faster, you wouldn't be able to maintain the spike if the opposing 4-way spammed Rapid Spin. While attack and speed are the go-to examples of gaining advantages through lowering one's own stats, there have been rare instances of lowered defenses being helpful as well. This is most apparent in the example of Generation 5's Custap Berry Skarmory. Custap Berry allows it to go first the first turn after it hits 25% HP or less, which makes it a perfect partner to Sturdy. However, Skarmory's natural physical bulk, in conjunction with the fact that it's not completely paper thin on the special side, means that it potentially runs the risk of being 2-hit KO'd by moves without getting dropped into Custap Berry range, meaning it'll only get Stealth Rock up and not both rocks and spikes as it's meant to. By minimizing its HP, defense, and special defense, it becomes as frail as possible, allowing it to reliably activate its Custap Berry. Beyond Custap Skarm, lowering bulk is quite rare. Well, besides Custap Fortress and Generation 5 Ubers, which is basically the same thing. However, when Genesect was terrorizing Gen 5 OU, some players would use Yachi Berry Garchomp with 11 defense IVs and 4 special defense EVs. This meant Garchomp's special defense was higher than its defense, so when Scarf Genesect switched into Garchomp, its down ability would give it a +1 to its attack, rather than its special attack, and therefore its Ice Beam wouldn't be strong enough to KO Garchomp through the Yachi Berry as it would otherwise. This was an incredibly specific and arguably unwise example, since lowering Garchomp's superb natural physical bulk by such a significant margin was highly detrimental. But it's another example of how defenses might be lowered for an advantage, as well as illustrating just how broken Genesect was and the desperate measures it drove players to use. Finally, Pokemon with Substitute and Leech Seed tend to lower their HP IVs. With a lower HP stat, Leech Seed heals you more, percentage-wise, which allows you to create more substitutes. The loss in bulk tends to not be too noticeable, as Subseeders are usually frail and thus their playstyle generally requires them to avoid taking hits. See Generation 3's Breloom or Shaman Sky in Gen 4 and 5 Ubers. The fact that you can gain advantages through lowering your own stats is testament to the possibilities in competitive Pokemon. Being efficiently creative in such regards will be rewarded. There are surely many other applications of lowered IVs just waiting to be discovered. Hopefully the video shed some light on some strategies and maybe inspired you to get out there, try them yourself, and perhaps even find a new one. If you did enjoy this video, make sure you subscribe, as I upload competitive Pokemon every single day and these discussion videos 3 to 4 times a month. Check out my previous discussion on the Fall of Starmie, and that's it guys, I'll see you in the next one.